But thank you all so much for joining us for Armchair Travel to Krakow, Poland with the Traveling Librarian. Join Jeff Klapes, the Traveling Librarian, for an armchair traveler's journey to Poland's impressive second city, Krakow, a captivating city rich in history and culture. We're going to explore an imposing castle, the medieval old town, and the historic Jewish Quarter of Kazimierz. I'm sure I'm getting all this wrong.
Don't worry about
it. With its charming cobbled streets, vibrant cafes, and gorgeous architecture, Krakow offers a perfect blend of the past and present. Visit nearby Auschwitz, the breathtaking salt mine, and the mountains south of the city. So Jeff is the retired head of reference services at the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library in Wakefield, Massachusetts, and an avid traveler and photographer. And I again want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring. So all nearly 175 of us who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jeff for joining us this afternoon. And Jeff, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
This Zoom is making this little cloud of hearts and applause things going up. That's kind of cute. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having me back. If I recognize a number of names, so if you've been to any of my programs before, you know I tend to be pretty informal, although since we're in webinar mode, I can't actually hear or see you, as Robert said. But if you have any questions as we go through, or comments, I particularly like to hear from people who've been to the places that I'm talking about, to hear about your experience as well. So feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll try and keep an eye on them as we go through the program. And when the program's over, I'll catch up with any that we missed. So I'm going to get started right away. This is a trip that I took actually very recently. This was just a couple months ago. I went at the end of May and early June. Just because I've always wanted to go there. I've never been to Poland, and it seemed like a good place to go, and I found a cheap flight. So I spent about 9 or 10 days there, which I think was a good amount of time to see the city and also to see things in the area as well. Krakow, or Kraków, as it's pronounced in Polish, is quite far south in the country. And in fact, I don't have my pointer. There we go. So you can see the capital here, Warsaw. Krakow is actually very far south, close to the Slovakian border, and only a couple of hours from the Tatra mountains, which they form the border between Slovakia and southern Poland. The country itself has about 38 million people, and Krakow is actually the second largest city. It's about the size of Boston, for those of you who are in my part of the country. And you probably know a little bit about Poland, at least that it's overwhelmingly Catholic, at least 3/4 Catholic. It is also, has been for a while, a member of the European Union, although they do not use the euro yet as their currency. They still use the zloty. And a close-up view where you can better see the mountains that are very close to the city. And we're going to take some day trips. The red lines are the different places that I went. I'll go into that in more detail as we get further into the program. I didn't notice if there's anybody attending today who is either Polish or of Polish extraction, or has been to Poland or is from Poland. But if so, please forgive my Polish pronunciation. I love languages. I speak a couple of different languages, but Polish is difficult. So I hope I don't mangle Polish pronunciation too much. You would be forgiven for thinking that Kraków is the capital of the country because of all the tourism attention it gets. In fact, it has far more tourists than any other part of the country. And it actually was the capital of Poland for close to 600 years. So there's a reason for all of this. This is the view from the room that I rented in the center of town on one of the main streets, very close to the historic center. And to give you an idea of what kind of the lay of the land is for the historic city, during World War II, mercifully, it was not bombed like Warsaw for example. So it retains its historic center much more so than a number of other places in Poland, and is a World Heritage Site. In fact, it was one of the first World Heritage Sites to be so named a number of decades ago. This is a model that was in one of the museums that you can go to that shows the medieval city, which is where we're going to focus a lot of our attention today. And you can see here the old city with the main market square, which we're going to start in. And then further south, right close to the river, dominating the river, is Wawel Hill, which is the original, the historic fortress, which remains today with its castle and its cathedral, and it's where the royal palace and the royal fortifications were for centuries. This model, you'll see, has two different colors of buildings. The ones in gold are, this represents the medieval period of the city, back when it was at its height, with all of the original fortifications all the way around the city. And the gold buildings are ones that would have been built in either brick or stone, and the darker black ones would have been built in wood. And of course, back at that time, wood was a problem because fires could very easily start. And like many other cities in medieval times, fires spread very quickly and damaged various parts of the city over the centuries. So slowly over time, most of those places got rebuilt in stone just because they were safer. And again, to show you the modern city, this is a map from Google that shows you the same area that we were just looking at, with Wawel Castle down at the bottom. The interesting thing here that you'll notice is that where there used to be walls, those walls were taken down in the early 19th century, the fortifications that used to encircle the old city, and they were turned into a beautiful park, which we're going to visit a little bit later. And that's one of the real highlights of modern Krakow. And this is an area, a map from a guidebook that shows you a little bit about how the city is organized. So the old town, will focus most of our attention in the old town, but there's a number of other neighborhoods a little further afield that have quite a few things to see if you're there long enough. And the ones we're going to spend the most time in will be Kazimierz and Podgorze, which are the former Jewish areas south of the original old city. It's a very walkable city. The river that goes through it, the Vistula, which is in Polish is Wisła, is a beautiful river. The city itself actually doesn't focus on the river like some other cities, like London or Paris and some other European cities. But the modern riverfront is actually quite nice because they've built a lot of promenades for bicyclists and walkers, and there's boat trips and so forth. The entire city, with the exception of Wawel Hill, most of the city is pretty flat, which makes it a very easy place to walk. They also have an excellent public transit system with trams that go all over the place, and buses. So it's very easy and very inexpensive to travel around the city. We're going to start in the very center. This is called Rynek Główny, the main market square. That's what that means in Polish. It is one of the largest public squares, medieval public squares in Europe, and it's surrounded by amazing architecture and scores of cafes and restaurants. So it's really the heart of the both the medieval city and the modern one. It was built in its current form in the 1200s and was the main center for commerce. And the huge cloth hall, which you can see here, still exists today and was the centerpiece. This is a computer-generated image in one of the museums that shows what the square would have looked like in the medieval period. And you can see that back then there were lots of different market stalls all over the square, which is much more open now. And also the other building that I'll point out here is the old town hall, of which only the tower remains. The rest of the building was taken down in later centuries, but we're going to spend a little bit of time in this area. This is what it looks like today. Krakow is incredibly touristed. And fortunately, I was there kind of on shoulder season, but it was beautiful weather. They get about 15 million people a year. That's an incredible number of people for a city like this. Although interestingly, the majority of those tourists are actually Poles, because Krakow is a very important historical city for the Poles. So many of the people who visit are people exploring the history of their own country. Fortunately, the city is big enough to absorb a lot of these tourists. But if you travel there, particularly during high or even shoulder season, be prepared for crowds because there will be a lot of them. This is the interior of that main cloth hall, which has changed a bit over the years. It's been added to over time. Had a major rebuild during the Renaissance, and now the interior is full of stalls that sell all different kinds of products for tourists and food and other kinds of things. At night, it becomes completely different because it shuts down and you can see a little bit better the elegance of the building, which would have originally been built for the guilds that sold cloth in the city back in the Middle Ages. On the outside, you can see these elegant arcades that were added in the 19th century. It's an absolutely beautiful building, and it's really the centerpiece of the square at this point. Right next to it is the 70-meter Gothic tower, which is all that remains of the original town hall that they took down in the 1800s. But you can climb this, and it's worth doing that if your knees are up for the very narrow staircases, because they give you a fantastic view over the center of the city. And if you're like me and get lucky, you may be able to see the tower of the church, which we're going to look at next. St. Mary's Church is the main church on the square here. And I don't know if any of you remember or have heard of the old classic story called The Trumpeter of Krakow. The Trumpeter still plays today. Every hour on the hour, there is a trumpeter who plays a traditional melody from the top of this tower, 24 hours a day, every single hour on the hour. And I was fortunate enough to hear it with this beautiful view from the other tower. But there are some really nice views around the square. I should mention that this square was completely redone about 20 years ago when they did a major archaeological study. So it was totally torn up in the first decade of the 21st century. You can see an aerial view here of just how much digging they did. And what they did with that is they learned a lot about the history of the development of the square through the centuries. And they turned it into a fascinating underground museum. So if you go into the cloth hall, you can actually go down, and there's an enormous museum below the square where you can literally see the layers of history, because over the centuries, it was different time periods. They built new layers on top of previous layers. And the museum demonstrates that quite nicely with a history of the city and the history particularly of the square and the buildings that were in it. And around the square are lots of beautiful buildings from all different time periods: the Gothic, the Renaissance, the Baroque, the Classical, 19th century. The most famous of which is St. Mary's Basilica. And as is often the case, this seems to happen to me a lot, the most important place that you want to visit is always under scaffolding. That's the way life goes. But the good thing about the scaffolding, of course, is that they're doing renovations to enhance and protect the historic building. I'll show you the interior of the church in just a moment. And I also, just because you may not be very familiar with Polish, it's a Slavic language, and it's very, very different from any other language that you might know. The pronunciation is hard, the spelling is hard, and these are just two examples of some signs which happen to say construction site, no entry, and attention construction workers. But fortunately, you do not have to learn Polish. It always helps to learn a few phrases like good morning, thank you, please, where is, all of those kinds of basic phrases, which are not too hard to pick up. But you certainly don't need to learn Polish to travel in any of the major cities in Poland. English is widely spoken in almost any hotel, restaurant. In fact, most of the places I went, assumed English. They didn't even bother to start in Polish because they know the vast majority of people that they're interacting with are going to be foreign speakers who either speak English as their native language or speak English as a common language. So you'll find English will get you pretty much everywhere in Krakow. So back to St. Mary's Basilica. This is the most famous church in the city, a Gothic masterpiece from the 14th century. Here's the main entrance door and a ceiling in the nave. The interior decoration is absolutely stunning. Here's the organ. And this just mind-blowing decoration, most of which actually, even though the church is much older, most of the decoration that you see is from the 18th century. And here's the choir looking towards the incredible gold altarpiece, which is certainly the highlight of any visit to the church. It's 40 feet high. It has panels that actually close and open, and was constructed in the 15th century over roughly a 20-year period by a single artist who carved this. The statues that you see of the individual saints are much larger than life size. In fact, most of them are around 12 feet tall. It was taken by the Nazis during World War II and eventually recovered in Bavaria, where it was returned later on to the church and completely restored a couple of decades ago. It's just an incredible work of art. It's considered a national treasure for the entire country, and you can see why. But all throughout the rest of the church, there is unbelievable decoration. This is in the choir. Carvings all over the place. Here is a shrine to Pope John Paul II, who is very important in the city. He wasn't actually born in Krakow, but he became the Archbishop of Krakow before he became Pope. So there are a lot of references to him and shrines to him in different churches around the city, since he was so important there. And just a couple more photographs showing you the area. This is a little chapel right behind that basilica, very tiny church to St. Barbara, which was built on a square that used to be a cemetery. The cemetery is now gone. But Krakow is lovely for just walking around and enjoying the little nooks and crannies of the city. It's impossible to get lost in Krakow because it's just not a very big city. And it's very easy to get your bearings. This is just on the opposite corner from the basilica. This very stylish Art Nouveau building has been turned, for better or for worse, into the Hard Rock Cafe. But the whole square is surrounded by glorious buildings from different time periods, many of which are hotels, restaurants, and so forth. One very popular attraction in the city is to take a horse-drawn carriage around, and it was kind of nice. Outside of the window of the room that I stayed in, you could hear the sound of hoof, the clip-clop of hoofs, morning, noon, and night. It really made it feel like a historic city. There's plenty of places to explore outside the historic center if you have the time. Because the weather was I got very nice weather while I was there. I was lucky. And to get away from a little bit of the tourist hubbub for a bit, I took a long walk along the river and through one of the major park areas to a mound that I'll show you in just a sec called the Kosciuszko Mound. Along the way, there was this lovely little Baroque chapel completely made of wood to St. Margaret and Judith, very Eastern European in style. But I climbed all the way up to this mound, which is one of 4 around Krakow. Two of them are prehistoric from long ago, and the other 2 more recent ones, like this one here, are memorials, which were built much more recently in the 1800s and 1900s to commemorate various important Polish national heroes. This one commemorates the national leader Kosciuszko, who is even, you'll find places in the United States that are named after him because he was so important. And it's about 100 feet high in the middle of this gorgeous park. on top of an existing hill. So the view is very impressive. And in fact, this is looking west towards the other artificial mound, which was built about 100 years later to commemorate yet a different leader who was important during World War I. But the view, if you climb to the top of the mound, gives you a great view back towards the city and Wawel Castle, which we'll visit in just a little bit, and all the way back to a nearby power station, which unfortunately is not, it looks like it might be a nuclear plant, but it's not. It's actually a coal-powered plant. And even off in another direction, I didn't get a chance to go here. It's a little off the beaten track, but this is a 17th century monastery, which is supposed to be very worth visiting if you have some time. But back in the city, the historic center, except for Wawel Castle and the hill that it's on, which you can see here, the city doesn't really focus on the river. But they've created all these beautiful lawns and parks so that you can stroll along the river. Many of the monuments are lit up at night, so it's a beautiful place to explore. And there's lots of churches. I think if you're into churches and you're into architecture, Krakow is going to be an amazing city for you. This is right next to the river. It's a Franciscan monastery called the Bernardine Church, a very lush Baroque church that was built in the late 1600s. You can see just how elaborate it is inside. Lots of gold, over-the-top Baroque altarpieces. On another side of the city, kind of making a circle around the center, this is called the Jagiellonian University, one of the oldest in the world. This is the medical college on the campus. But far more important for visitors is the Collegium Maius, which is the oldest of the campus buildings and now a museum. And the statue that you see on the right here is probably its single most famous student, who was Nicholas Copernicus, who studied there. The building is from the 1400s, and it has this lovely courtyard with a well in the center and arcades around it. And it's now a museum. So you can see the interior, which has rooms basically as they were during medieval days, some of which have been turned into exhibitions of what student life would have been like in those time periods. These are some things, this actually is a room completely dedicated to Copernicus. This incredible door, inlaid door. And on the left, this is an old anatomical model, which reminded me very much of that. I don't know if any of you remember that game that you used to play called Operation when we were kids, where you were supposed to lift the little, well, anyway, never mind. It reminded me a little bit of that, except it's several hundred years earlier. This is the library, which had an incredible collection of early volumes. And this is the dining hall. I bet it's considerably nicer than any of the dining halls we went to when we were in college. So Copernicus would have had dinner here. And this room, which is probably the most dramatic in the whole building, is the impressive lecture hall, which is very richly decorated with portraits of all the school's leaders all the way around the room. The hotel that I stayed in was pretty inexpensive. I would say Krakow these days, it's not incredibly cheap, but it's certainly less expensive than some of the big capitals like Rome or Paris or London, as far as European cities are concerned. And my hotel actually had an incredibly sumptuous breakfast, which was included in the room rate. You could get a full English breakfast, a full Polish breakfast, and I had a view. If you were eating breakfast, you could actually look out at this gorgeous Gothic church right across the street. They even had Prosecco, which I think is an incredible way to start the day. That was just part of breakfast, the breakfast buffet. So this is that church. It's called the Holy Trinity, a very early church from the 1200s, Gothic in style. With a beautiful interior, of course, and some incredible interior carving in the choir. I saw so many churches in Krakow that, to be perfectly honest, there's a lot of them that I don't even remember which ones there were. This was a relatively small Baroque chapel, but I remember finding it very impressive for one that was so tiny. Here's another one. And if it gets hot, which it actually did while I was there, I had expected kind of chilly, rainy weather because it was late spring. But it turned out to be quite warm the entire time I was there, and that made it almost obligatory to spend some time in the park, which is called the Planti. And that's the one that I showed you earlier that completely encircles the old town, where the original fortification walls used to be. So now it's completely tree lined. There's pavilions, there's things for kids to do, there are places to get ice cream, benches to sit on, and just elegant paths and lots of shade, which is really nice when it's warm. Walking in the city is unbelievably easy and safe. I was really struck by this. I've never, particularly coming from Boston, spending a lot of time in Athens. Krakow was totally different. Pedestrians get an incredible amount of respect there. In fact, most of the streets I saw didn't even have walk signals. All you have to do is step out into the street and traffic stops dead if there is a pedestrian. I've never seen a city like this before. If you do that in Boston, you're taking your life in your hands. And even the taxi cabs would stop, which is just unheard of. I've never been to a city like this. But it made it very pleasant to stroll around the city because it was so safe. I'm not sure exactly what this symbol was. This is either a small child, a pedestrian holding a very large balloon or a very large lollipop, or maybe it's one of those signs that's supposed to say stop and go on either side. I wasn't entirely sure. There are some fortifications that still remain of the ones that used to circle the entire city, so we'll see a little bit of that in just a minute. But as a student of architectural history, it was just a magnificent city for me to walk around in because there's a wealth of things to see from so many different time periods. This is an Art Nouveau building on the north edge of the city called the Globe House for obvious reasons. It has a globe on the top. Originally built for the Chamber of Commerce. And it has some symbols of commerce built into the side of the building, a ship that would have traveled the world bringing products to and from Poland. Another example, this kind of black and white decoration is very common in Eastern Europe, less so in Western Europe. And this is another of the main remaining fortifications. This is called the Barbican, which was built in the late 1400s as part of the fortification walls of the city. And it's one of the few parts that still remains. They've turned it into an exhibition space, but it has become the main entrance to the city on the north side. Here's another view of it there. But there's quite a few places where you can see the fortifications. This one has been turned into a museum, which we're going to visit later. But all over the city, there's just incredibly impressive details on every street. And of course, Poland is known for food. I'm going to show you a variety of different kinds of food from not just Polish food, from other nearby cultures as well. They're big on donuts. So for those of you who are anywhere near Dunkin' Donuts here in Massachusetts, the Poles have their equivalent, and they're big fans of those. Another one of the big churches is the 13th century Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, which has some beautiful stained glass inside. It's known for its stained glass in its interior, as well as its connection to Pope John Paul II, who used to stay here before he became Pope. When he stayed in the city, he would often stay in this monastery. And something I found interesting, of course, as in many churches, in many religions, you can light a candle. Usually you throw €1 in the box and light a candle. in someone's memory, but here they are very advanced, and you can even, if you don't have any coins on you, you can pay by card to do the same thing. This is another magnificent Baroque church that I don't remember which one it is. And some more interesting architecture around the city. There's a lot from the early 20th century, Art Nouveau and even Art Deco buildings, which have incredible details and just little decorations on them, Victorian doodads. This interesting one has curves all over it, but I don't know if you can see up at the top. Here's a closer view. This is known as the Singing Frog House because it has a singing frog at the top. If you're interested in street food, there's a lot of street food throughout the city. These are a very inexpensive way to have breakfast that you can walk down the street with. They're kind of pretzel-y, but they tend to be more like a breakfast style pretzel. But they have that thick kind of bagel-y kind of dough, but they often have either poppy seeds or sesame seeds on them. Excuse me, and they're very, very popular to just grab one as you're walking down the street and eat as you walk to work. This is another basilica, much more recent. It was built right before World War I. So it's kind of Art Nouveau in style and has these beautiful decorations inside in a style that's very distinctly 20th century, including some modern murals and some stained glass. This, on the other hand, is built slightly before, in the late 1890s. This is the National Theatre and Opera House that was modeled on the Opera House in Paris to imitate the luxury of the Parisian Opera House. And there's a lot of that kind of architecture throughout the city. Again, I mentioned earlier that Krakow miraculously escaped a lot of the damage that many other cities in Eastern Europe did during World War II. So the historic city did not require as much reconstruction as places like Warsaw did. And that has made the historic center just, it's picture perfect in much the way that Prague is. If you've been to Prague, it's very similar. Let's talk a little bit about food. The restaurant scene is really vibrant, not just for Polish food. I was really surprised. I expected a lot of Polish restaurants, which there are, but there were also all kinds of other ethnic restaurants. There was Greek, there was Italian, there was Indian, there was Hungarian, there was Georgian food, there was Armenian food. So almost every night I sampled a different cuisine, mostly from Eastern Europe, just because it was a way to try a lot of different things. This is Polish. On the left is borscht, beet soup, which is made in very many different kinds of recipes. This is a thin broth with a little vinegar in it that I liked because it gave a little kick to it. And the ever popular pierogies, which are on the right, which are essentially like little raviolis, and they can be filled with meat, vegetables, mushrooms, sauerkraut. They even have sweet ones for dessert. And it's a very filling dinner. A couple more of the major churches. These were just a block from the room that I stayed in. This is Saints Peter and Paul, the earliest Baroque church in the city from about 1600, and right next to it, literally next door, you can see the other one here, is a Romanesque church, which is one of the earliest churches in the city. This is from the 11th century. A really nice thing about Krakow that I enjoyed was every night they have all over the city, there are very inexpensive classical music concerts. Most of them take places in the churches or other well-known public spaces. I'm a huge fan of Chopin, he spent much of his life, of course, in France, but he's a native son of Poland, actually from Warsaw, not Krakow. But he's a national hero everywhere in the country. And so I was able to go to a recital that was Chopin by candlelight. They actually had candles throughout the hall, which was lovely. It was in the Benedictine church. And I think it only costs 15 or 20 euros, and you can pretty much walk up at the last minute. So if you like classical music, there's no shortage of wonderful events that you can go to in the evening to hear some good music. This is another square in the city that's completely surrounded by Art Nouveau buildings with amazing decorations on them. Here's a close-up and another one of the buildings. And this weird, sort of vaguely Egyptian revival building, which is called the Society of the Friends of Fine Arts. So now it's a cultural exhibition space. But it actually has sort of Egyptian motifs to it. That's the entrance on the side. If you find walking around the city too tiring, one thing that you can do that seemed to be very popular, as far as I could tell, are these little electric carts that you can pay for a tour and a tour guide that will drive you around the city. They come in different sizes, so some of them only take 2 or 3 people, like a golf cart. Some of them are little stretch ones like this that hold more people. But they're electric, which is nice because they don't make a lot of noise or fumes. And it's a good way, particularly if you don't have too much time, if you're only there for a couple days, it's a good way to get around the city quickly and have a local guide who can show you places and answer questions for you. But there are a lot of tourists. Even though I wasn't there at the height of summer, there were enormous numbers of tourists, many of whom were teenagers or school students traveling from other parts of the country to see one of the most historic cities in their culture. So be prepared for that. This is a different restaurant. I mentioned all the different ethnic restaurants. This is a Georgian restaurant, not Georgia in the United States, Georgia in the Caucasus, I haven't been to Georgia yet, but it's high on my list. I really want to go hiking in the mountains in Georgia. And it was great to go to a restaurant that had all kinds of interesting Georgian wines and Georgian food. And it was literally a block from my hotel. There's a number of public markets that are fun to enjoy, and just some more typical street scenes and architectural details. A number of buildings have, like the lion that you can see on the right, have animal carvings like this that were used by wealthy families as symbols to identify their homes. Here's another weird building. It's known as the Spider House, for obvious reasons. It's ornate, creepy, a little bizarre. It was built, you can see the date, 1889. It was built in the Victorian era by an architect for his own, it was built for his own home. Why it has the spider, nobody is quite sure, but it's just another, it's worth it to get a guidebook, an architectural guidebook, to point these things out, because you could easily walk by them and miss them. This was a Hungarian restaurant I stopped at. So of course I had to have goulash and some Hungarian salads. Another beautiful confection of a building right across from my hotel. If you like these kinds of urban details and also people watching between the locals and the tourists, it was a really wonderful place to just sit yourself down and watch the world go by. Given all the churches and monasteries in the city, it should come as no surprise that there's actually a lot of monks and a lot of nuns walking around. Poland is a fairly observant country. Unlike a lot of Western European countries like France and the Netherlands, where they are nominally Christian, but attendance has fallen off in recent decades, Poland is still pretty observant. And I don't think there was a single church I went into where there weren't locals in there praying, lighting candles. It is still a fairly religious country, and very observant. Just some more buildings and more fun details around the city. And beautiful colors. It's not a drab city by any means. Just outside the northern walls, this is a square very close to the train station called, this is called the Grunwald Monument. And it commemorates an important king from the late 14th, early 15th century. And it was built in 1910 to commemorate the 500th anniversary of an important battle when Poland and Lithuania decisively defeated the Teutonic Order, which gave them more independence at that time period. Poland, of course, being a flat place in between major powers on either side, Lithuania, Russia, Prussia, Germany. As you know, Poland has been caught in the middle of a lot of battles throughout history. And at night, it's a delightful city to walk around. The streets are very atmospheric. It's very safe to walk around. Most of the buildings and monuments are spotlit, including the Wawel Castle, which we'll visit in just a moment. And there's plenty of things to be tempted by in the stores, souvenirs, food, and just beautiful buildings. The square in particular, the main market square, is particularly stunning at night. And it's where everybody focuses their attention. It's completely mobbed at night, and there are cafes and restaurants all the way around the perimeter. It's like a stage set where people go to see and be seen. I wanted to go to this cafe. This is one of the more sumptuously decorated Art Nouveau cafes. It's called the Café Noworodki. But I didn't go because upon further investigation, I discovered it gets among the worst reviews of any restaurant in the entire city. For the service, the food, it's just like, it's 1 star. So I decided, okay, I'm not going there, as beautiful as it is. So I just took pictures through the windows, where you can see that even on a busy night full of tourists, there's basically nobody there. So I'm kind of glad I didn't put myself through it, but I got some pretty pictures of the interior of the building. This is the corner that leads away from the square. My hotel was just a couple blocks down, so very, very convenient, just not even 2 or 3 minutes from the main square. And at night also, it's very popular to take a boat ride on the Vistula River. They have dinner cruises, lots of floating restaurants that will take you up and down. And I'm going to now show you the historic royal part of the city, which is a premier attraction for anyone going there. And in fact, it's one of the most visited places in all of Poland. The hill is about 100 feet high, so it's been settled for a very long time. And it was where Polish royalty built their fortifications and their castles, starting roughly, most of what you see here is from the 14th century or later. It's a huge complex. This is the entry ramp that goes up, and you want to go early to beat the crowds. The cathedral and the castle are the 2 biggest draws. And the ticketing is a little complicated because you have to buy a separate ticket for different parts of the complex. The cathedral is the 3rd such building on the site, and the earliest was from the 11th century. As you enter, here's this funny little person checking you out on the way in. And as with all the other churches that we've seen, it's just incredible inside, with different chapels from different time periods and different styles. You can also visit the crypts, which is where most of Polish royalty throughout the centuries is buried. They were also crowned here. This is the cathedral from the outside. It's kind of an odd mishmash of styles because it was altered so many times throughout its history. But you can climb the bell tower, which is well worth doing if you don't mind the stairs, because there's a nice view from up there, and you get to see some really gigantic bells that are still in use today. The second thing that you'll want to visit is the castle itself, which is now a collection of museums. This would have been the royal residence for Polish royalty throughout the years. But now it's a collection of different museums with an enormous courtyard in the middle. And in addition to the rooms that have been restored to the time period when royalty would have been there, it's also an incredible museum collection with decorative arts, furnishings, paintings, and so forth throughout Polish history. They even have some important artworks. This is Hieronymus Bosch on the left. A massive collection of gold and silver and ceramics, costumes, metalworks, furniture, all kinds of things. And the building itself is very impressive. There's some ceilings like this in the royal state rooms. The most impressive ceiling is this one on the right, which has individually sculpted heads. It's actually much bigger than the section I'm showing you in what used to be a throne room. On the left is a guy, I don't remember who this is of, but it kind of made me think he was saying, look at my amazing clock, which is pretty amazing. This is a room completely filled with Meissen porcelain. This is that throne room with the ceiling covered with heads. And they also have a fascinating display, which didn't seem to fit with anything else, but it was incredibly unusual. They have an assortment of Ottoman Turkish military tents that were acquired by the Polish royalty over time. And they have, at least 8 or 10 like full-size tents showing what it would have been like if you were in the Ottoman military on campaign. There's lots of royal regalia and paraphernalia in the treasury. And my favorite room was this little one. This is called the Cabinet of Curiosities, which had a display of oddities that the Polish royals collected over the centuries. And just a completely bizarre mix of things like a cup made out of a beautiful shell, a gold chicken made out of an ostrich egg. And of course, if you have a gold chicken made out of an ostrich egg, it's important to have a special carrying case made for it so that you can take it when you go on vacation. Who knows? Another place that you can visit, which yet again requires a separate ticket. These gardens aren't very large, but they're very beautiful and are kind of on terraces down the side of the hill. So they have beautiful views over the city. This is a view from those gardens where you can see just how much Krakow is there's no skyscrapers, there's no modern buildings anywhere in the old city. It really feels medieval. It's a city of spires and steeples that looks like it did years ago. This is a view of the castle from below, just to give you an idea of how massive it is. You can wander around many of the parts of this royal complex without a ticket, but you need a ticket in order to enter the different buildings and museums. But if you just want to go up for the views, that's free. You can just walk around the ramparts and look around. But you can see just how busy it gets. So if you go, I advise that you go very early in the morning. Get there as soon as it opens so you have a little time before it gets totally overrun. This is that church I showed you the interior of a while ago and where I went to the Chopin concert, the Bernardine Church, which is surrounded by these almost wild gardens. It looks like it could be out in the countryside, but you are right in the middle of the city, literally next to one of the big intersections and the castle. There's a number of day trips that you can take from Krakow if you have time, and I'm going to do a couple of those now. The By far the most popular is Auschwitz, which is better known as Auschwitz. It was actually, and still is, an old town in its own right, long before the 20th century. It's about 60 kilometers, like an hour and a half west of Krakow. It is now the most visited place in all of Poland. And this is probably one of the most famous images from the site, Arbeit macht frei, which means work will set you free. I have to admit, I think it is important for any traveler at some point in your life, you need to visit a concentration camp. It's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly moving. It's just incredibly emotional. But I think it's one of those experiences you have to have, so that all that stuff that you learned in school becomes real when you see an actual physical place where these events took place. I have to say I'm a little conflicted about Auschwitz, because I had actually, when I was in Munich a number of years ago, I went to Dachau, which is the concentration camp not too far from that city. And I had a very different experience. Auschwitz these days is, as I said, it's the most visited place in all of Poland. So it's very touristy, because it's so famous. But it's still an incredibly moving experience. And I think it's hard to go to Krakow without going there. But it's a little, I felt it a little bit funny about it, because I was realizing how this is a place which, of course, was created by the Nazis to efficiently process as many human beings as possible to their deaths. Nowadays, I almost felt, and I kind of felt guilty about this, but it felt like it was now designed to process as many tourists as possible. So it even has a huge gift shop. There's something a little strange about that. However, having said that, I think it's incredibly important to go there. You can visit it independently on your own if you wish. Most people go on a tour, which also makes it difficult, because if you're there on your own, you're going to be fighting huge numbers of tour groups. But it's still a somber and just unbelievably moving experience to see it firsthand. It's estimated that roughly 1.1 million people, and of course these are estimates, died here. The overwhelming majority of them, of course, were Jews, but there were also tens of thousands of Poles, as well as captured Soviet soldiers, Roma, disabled people, political and sexual minorities, but the bulk of the people who died here were Jews. You can visit most of the buildings, and I have to say, the tours were actually very well done. There's incredibly knowledgeable guides who take you through the different places and explain how everything worked. There are some incredible exhibits, including this heartbreaking pile of shoes from the victims, photographs of the prisoners, and you can also see the barracks where people stayed. You can even enter the actual gas chambers, which is very disturbing. Not everybody feels comfortable doing that, so I would completely understand if you didn't. But it's an unbelievable experience to actually stand in a gas chamber and understand what happened there within the lifetime of many people who are still alive today. But if you go there, I would highly recommend, not everybody does this, but it's very easy to do. Right next to Auschwitz is Birkenau, which I found to be actually a much better experience, because for some reason, everybody goes to Auschwitz, but hardly anybody goes to Birkenau. So there's far fewer visitors, but it is equally impressive, equally poignant. You can actually see the train cars that brought people to their doom. It's very unsettling. It's just unimaginable. But I found that going to Birkenau was a more profound experience just because there were fewer people there. And you could get a better sense of what it was like without feeling as touristed. There are fewer buildings at Birkenau, and that's because at the very end of the war, when the Nazis realized the end is on its way, they destroyed much of what remained at this site. But what remains is gut-wrenching. And as I said, there are fewer visitors to detract from the experience. So if you have the chance, do both, because I think it'll give you a better understanding of things. Another major tourist attraction and very popular day trip from the city is the Wieliczka Salt Mine, which is one of the world's oldest. It goes back to the 13th century. Since then, over 700 years, they were mining salt up until about 30 years ago. And you can see just how massive it is. The tours take you through several kilometers of tunnels, not to mention several hundred stairs. You go down about 700 or 800 stairs here, and then you walk through an extended part of the mine. It takes about 3 hours total, which may be more salt mine than you really want. So think about your interest in salt mines and your mobility. Fortunately, at the very end of the tour, when you get down to the bottom, there is an elevator that will take you back up. You don't have to climb. But it is very impressive. I think it could be a little shorter, but you have to go on a tour. You can't go through on your own, but the tours are done in multiple languages, and they are really well done. They tell you about the geology, the history, the process of mining the salt. Here you can actually see some the ruts that were worn by the trams into the soft stone. And you can see different forms of salt that can be found in the mine. Here's some of the salt that actually precipitated out from moisture. But there's a lot of walking, endless tunnels, and underground water, including lakes and rivers, which are still there today. Probably the highlight of the tour is when you get to one of the largest of the underground chambers, which is this massive chapel. You enter at the top. And everything that you see in this photograph, it's called the Chapel of St. Kinga. She was a Polish saint from the 13th century, and this chapel is dedicated to her. And everything that you see here is carved out of salt. It's 300 feet underground. So the altar is carved out of salt. Even the chandelier, that is not glass, that is carved out of salt. So it's incredibly impressive. You can actually get married here. They have frequent weddings down underground. I have no idea what that costs, but I imagine it's pretty expensive. Here's a carving of the Last Supper. There's one of Pope John Paul II, of course, and some others. And you see a number of other major large underground chambers. This is a view of the lake, and a lot of another huge hall that has scaffolding to hold up the walkways. When you get down to the bottom, you're about 1,000 feet underground. So, like I said, fortunately, there is an elevator that will take you back to the surface. If you go there, I was on a tour, which was kind of a shame because the town that the salt mine is located in is actually quite pretty. So, if you have a chance, I wish I had had more time to explore the town. It's a nice sort of resort town. And after a strenuous day like this, I did both Auschwitz and the salt mine in one day, which I think was too much. It made for a very long and kind of emotionally overpowering day. So at the end, I had to have some hearty Polish food with delicious soup and meat and potatoes. The other day trip that I took on a tour, again, if you've been to my programs before, you know I'm not a huge fan of organized tours. I prefer to do things on my own, but sometimes it's just easier if there's no good public transportation. So I did take a tour down to the mountains, which was nice because they basically dropped us and left us for the afternoon by ourselves. And there were only 6 people on the tour, so it was basically just a little minivan with a guide, which wasn't too bad. And so this is, if you go straight south from the city, we stopped in this nice little town called Chokołów to enjoy its traditional architecture. This is a small village, maybe 1,000 people, that goes back to the 16th century, and it's known for its wooden houses, which have a very traditional sort of alpine mountain style. Most of them are built with decorative gables that face the street, and they have elaborate carved decorations, fun downspouts like this one. Everything is built out of wood with shingle roofs and constructed from these huge logs, which traditionally in this town are washed with a sort of brine solution every year, which kind of bleaches out the color, so they have a particularly traditional light color to the wood. The village was also known for an uprising in the mid-1800s when this was part of the Austrian Empire. It was unsuccessful. The Austrians put it down quite easily. But there is still a little museum that you can visit that talks about the history of the village and the history of the uprising. There are some very simple homes and some very elaborate ones. So it makes a nice stop on the way down to the mountains, which you can see getting closer and closer. We also stopped at a place that sells some traditional products of this region. This is a local cheese, which they form into these interesting little shapes with wooden molds. And then they smoke them for a good, at least 2 weeks in little smokehouses. And then they serve it by grilling it. And usually it's served with a plum jam or a cherry jam, and often served with vodka or liqueurs made from plums or cherries. It was a very delicious snack, and you can buy it in most of the places around here. But the highlight was to get all the way to the Tatra Mountains, which are on the southern border with Slovakia. And this is a town called Zakopane, a very popular holiday destination for Polish people today, especially in the winter, because it's a very big ski resort. You can see this is the mountains in the distance, which are still snow-capped. This was the beginning of June, the very first days of June. You would never guess, if I showed you this photo without telling you what country it is, you'd probably never guess this was Poland. Most people think of Poland as very flat, which much of it is. It's kind of the Ohio of Europe, but this area is really dramatic. The highest peaks here are around 8,000, 9,000 feet high. So it's a perfect ski resort. In fact, this is looking down over the town, and you can see some of the ski jumps that during the winter are used for downhill ski competitions. It was actually a very small town for a long time, until about the 19th century, when they discovered mining in the area. So it became a big mining center for a while, and then very quickly morphed into a spa resort town, because it was relatively accessible by train from Krakow, and it had a pleasant mountain climate. So during the heat of summer, you could escape to the mountains where it would be cooler. And you can see just how beautiful the landscape is around. It's a very popular alpine getaway for Polish people. And it's a big enough town now that it has lots of restaurants, lots of places to stay, and beautiful nature. So there's lots of hiking trails, even if you don't ski, or you're there during the summer. There's lots of natural beauty and nature activities to do. And one of the must-do things is to take the funicular up the mountain, or you can hike a path. I took the funicular up and hiked down. for stunning views out over the town and the valley and the mountain range behind. I did find it kind of funny, um, given that I'm here in Massachusetts where we have beautiful beaches, and I spend time in Greece where there are many beautiful beaches. So here in the Tatra Mountains, they don't have any beaches, so they created one. So here are Polish people enjoying the beach up on top of the mountains, and instead of looking at the ocean, they look at the mountain range. But the town has some lovely alpine architecture with a very distinct mountain style, with the very steep roofed houses and villas that slide the snow off in the winter. Like this one, I couldn't actually tell. This was so huge. I thought it was a hotel at first, but I think I realized it's actually, you can tell from the BMWs in the driveway, I think it was actually a very wealthy person's house. There's also a beautiful church close to the town, just on the outskirts, which reminded me of a number of churches I've seen in Romania, a very Eastern European style of wooden architecture. It's not that old. It's only about 120 years old, beginning of the 20th century. It's a chapel to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. But note the interesting stained glass. It's just a beautiful little chapel on the edge of the mountains, typical of the local style of architecture. It even has a wooden chandelier. And it's fun to explore the town, which has, it's been mostly pedestrianized. So there's lots of shops and restaurants and historic buildings, very quaint center of town with a river running through it, right through the center. Plenty of cool buildings to look at, as well as a couple of small museums about the history of the town, the history of the region. I just liked this restaurant called Reserved. Kind of made me think that it must be incredibly difficult to get a table here. But you can see more of those local products, the cheeses that I showed you earlier, lots of sweets, sauerkraut, all kinds of canned vegetables and fruits and syrups and all kinds of different products that are popular in Poland, as well as textiles. There's beautiful lace, linens, embroidery that you can also get here. And if you aren't interested in any of the local crafts, there were people selling abandoned Amazon packages, which I understand is now a thing all over the world, not just in Poland. This is the first place I saw it. So these are packages that people, for whatever reason, never got. They never got delivered, or they were abandoned. And so it's kind of a, you can pay an amount of, €5 or whatever, and you have no idea what it's going to be until you open it. So you may go home with a new iPhone or a pair of socks. Who knows? But I thought that was kind of fun. I didn't buy anything. Just some more examples of the private homes in the town. Very atmospheric. And obviously, I was there in the early summer, but from photographs I saw it's equally beautiful in the winter. Just a very different alpine scene with snow everywhere. I was lucky to be there at the time I was, because it was lilac season, and Zakopane is completely overflowing with huge lilac bushes that were all in bloom. Back in Krakow, I'll show you, finish the presentation with just a couple more things to see in that area. This is one of the best museums in the city, the Czartoryski Museum, which is one of the best collections in all of Poland. And it was started in the 1790s by a princess in that family, the royal family. And now it encompasses several different buildings with quite a diverse collection. They've renovated the building, so it's quite modern now. And it has an odd mix of stuff. They have decorative arts, they have furniture, tapestries, paintings, gold peacocks. They even have the death mask and the hand of Frédéric Chopin, the composer. Things like this amazing chess set. A huge collection of ancient art. They had Greek and Roman artifacts, sculptures, Egyptian mummies, a very large collection of arms and armor from the medieval period, um, a very large painting collection also, including this kind of appalling collection of fighting cherubs, painted by a probably justifiably unknown artist. But also some things like this incredible gold flagon made out of a shell, one of the most famous works in the museum, and also equally famous. On the left is the highlight of the whole museum. This is Leonardo da Vinci, a portrait of a lady with an ermine from 1490, which has a whole room all to itself because it's probably the most valuable piece in the entire museum. But there's no way that you can visit Krakow without also exploring the Jewish history of the city, which is fascinating and also, as you can imagine, very depressing. The two biggest districts where you'll see all this stuff are kind of on the southeast of the old city, outside the original medieval walls, Kazimierz and Podgorze, which are very beautiful neighborhoods in their own right, but they embody the Jewish history of the city and also of Poland in general. This particular church, this is a Catholic church. Kazimierz was once a separate royal village just outside the city walls, but eventually became part of the city. And it's one of the few parts of the city outside the historic center that did get significantly damaged during World War II. This is the Church of Corpus Christi, which is just dripping with gold, and also has some more horrid cherubs. And in between these two districts, there is a very modern bridge built only about 15 years ago that connects Kazimierz with Podgorze across the river. It's only for pedestrians and cyclists, and it's a convenient way to get across. It's named after a well-known priest named Father Bernatek. But it's lit up at night, and it has these interesting sculptures of life-sized acrobats playing on the support wires. And just across in that neighborhood is something called the Krikoteka, which is an art museum dedicated to a specific Polish artist who you probably never heard of, but he was an important artist and also a theater director. So the museum is dedicated to his work. And it's this very modern structure built over an old 19th century power plant. And here you can see, again, on both sides, it's a wonderful place to stroll, cycle. But the neighborhoods themselves are really nice to walk around in because they have a lot of original architecture. This is one of the big market squares in Kazimierz. And there's some nice walking tours that you can take to see a number of the historic synagogues that still remain. What's difficult, I think, about this kind of tourism is that the buildings are beautiful, the history is fascinating, but it's difficult coming to grips with the fact that pretty much the entire Jewish population of Krakow has all but disappeared. And in fact, of the different synagogues that you can see marked on this map, only two still offer services of any kind. Only one of them offers regular services. The other only does it on occasion. And they're quite small. So out of the original 68,000 Jews that were in Krakow pre-World War II, only about 1,000 remain, roughly. They were expelled from this district of Kazimierz into a walled ghetto that was created across the river in the other neighborhood, Podgorze. And from there, they were kept in the ghetto until gradually, over time, being sent to their deaths in the camps. So you can visit many of these beautiful synagogues, but it's sad knowing that most of them have been basically turned into museums. They are no longer active places of worship. This one is the oldest and dates back to the 15th century and is an absolutely amazing museum. The building itself is beautiful, but it has a large collection of religious artifacts and also documents. that explain the history of Jewish culture in Poland and in the city itself. Here's some views of the interior. And this is the exterior, the main facade. It is, in fact, the oldest synagogue in all of Poland, not just in Krakow. And here is the back. There's a nice market around here. Many of these synagogues are clustered around a big plaza called Zeroka, which is a long, narrow plaza that's kind of become the center of Jewish life in the city. So there are a lot of restaurants serving traditional Jewish food, bookstores, and so forth. This is another one of the main synagogues to visit, and it's much more recent. This was built in the 19th century, so it has almost a Victorian feel to it, called the Temple Synagogue. And inside, a very elaborate maroon and gold interior with lots of drippy Victorian decorations. It also has some very interesting historic exhibits inside. And another of this is probably the tiniest of the remaining synagogues, but it's exquisite. This is from the 16th century, the Ramu Synagogue, which this is pretty much the whole thing. But the decoration inside is just beautiful. And right behind it is a quite large and atmospheric cemetery from the same time period. This is not a modern cemetery from the 20th century. It is a 16th century one. So the tombs are quite beautiful, very traditional. And this whole neighborhood just is a delightful place to walk around and visit the different monuments and synagogues and eat good food and learn about the history. This is one that was unfortunately closed, and it was too bad. When I was there, it was closed. It's no longer a synagogue. It's been turned into one of the better known bookstores in the country. I'm sorry, in the city. If you get tired of walking around, these people are not in line for one of the big attractions of the city. They are in line for ice cream. That's how warm it was when I was there. If you don't want ice cream, pretty much every neighborhood, every restaurant claims to have the best pierogies in all of the city. So feel free to sample them all and compare. On this particular day, I went back for some more Polish food. This was a delicious stew with mushrooms. And for dessert, they're pancakes, but they're thick. And they're crispy, unlike American pancakes. These were, I think they were deep fried, so they had a nice soft interior and very crispy on the outside. Really good to end the day. Or if you don't want that, you can get a fluffy apple tart. I didn't eat both of those on the same meal. These are actually from two different meals, just so you know. And the last neighborhood we'll visit is the other one across the river, called Podgórze. The main square as you cross the river has a very large public square with a monument that has 68 chairs in the main square. There were a number of little memorials to Jews in Israel right now, because of course the war in Gaza is still going on right now, and there are still remaining captives in Gaza being kept there by Hamas. So there were understandably a lot of political statements around the city. Each of the 68 chairs in this square represents 1,000 of the Jews that lived there before World War II. So both of these districts, Kazimierz that we were just in and Podgórze right across the river, did suffer a certain amount of damage, unlike the historic center, and also neglect both during and after the war. But they've seen quite a renaissance and a lot of restoration in recent years, particularly starting in the 1990s. And that was due in a large part to the release of Steven Spielberg's film Schindler's List, which came out in the 90s. And that brought a lot of attention to the history of the city. This church, which presides over that big square, is called St. Joseph's Church, and it looks like a huge, almost like a big wedding cake. It's actually kind of bland on the inside, but it's a fantastic Gothic revival confection, kind of looking out over the square. But here's a map of that district, and the black line that you may be able to see here, most of the city that we've seen before is north of the river, and all of this black line denotes where during the 1940s they built the wall to create the ghetto, and they relocated all the Jews into this area. There is one little stretch of wall. This is a historic photo in the museum showing one of the entrance gates, and there is still a small section of the original wall that has been left as a memorial, showing you what it would have looked like. A tiny museum that I think often gets overlooked is called the Eagle Pharmacy, and it's at the opposite end of that big square. In 1941, when they created the ghetto, it was incorporated into it, but it had a Polish owner. And the owner refused to leave, and he refused to close down. So he is very famous now, as well as his son, who kept the place going. Throughout the entire period of the ghetto, he continued to offer pharmaceutical services to the Jews who were living there. In many cases, he gave them medicines for free. So it's been sort of recreated to look like what it did at that time period. And now it's a really nice little museum with a lot of documentary history and oral histories that you can listen to, and all kinds of other exhibits that talk about what life was like in the ghetto at this time period. But by far the highlight in this part of the city, and in fact the second most visited place in all of Poland after Auschwitz, is Oskar Schindler's factory, which you can see here. You have to book tickets well in advance. Make sure that even before you go to Krakow, or as soon as you get there, go online and buy tickets, because it sells out very, very quickly. You can go on your own independently, or you can go on a tour. Either way is fine, but you'll find a lot of people who go on tours. So if you go by yourself, you will find that you're kind of competing for space with tour guides. It's a large museum with a lot of interactive exhibits about the history of the Jews in Poland, the history of the Jews in World War II, the history of Jews specifically in the city, and of course, the story of Oskar Schindler, who in 1943 saved over 1,000 Jews. I'm sure you know the story. If you haven't read the book, you saw the film, by claiming that the 1,000 Jews that he hired to work in his factory were indispensable to his factory, which produced different kinds of metal products. So they were saved from being sent to the camps because he had the clout, the political and economic clout, to say that he needed them as workers for his factories. I would plan a good 2 hours to see the museum. There's an awful lot to see there. This is his office, pretty much as it was. But because it is so popular and so visited, make sure that you book tickets well in advance. And again, at the end, after a long day of touring around, treat yourself to a big bowl of borscht when you're done. And I had a couple of extra days there, so I did some things that most people don't bother to do. And I wouldn't say this is top of the list, but it was kind of interesting. I took a tram just a few kilometers to the northeast of the city to a district called Nowa Huta, which is a post-war communist housing development that was built in the decade after the war ended. So it has a very communist look to it, with big giant apartment buildings with broad avenues and large squares, very typical of the kind of bland post-war architecture that you see in a lot of Europe. But it has become actually a kind of vibrant neighborhood. It's busy, has lots of people living there. There's even a big central square named after Ronald Reagan. And there's a few interesting buildings to see there, including a couple of very modern churches. For the first few decades, under communist rule, churches were not even allowed in Nowa Huta. But people gradually demanded them. In the 1970s, they were successful at getting a couple of modern churches built. This is the one of St. Maximilian Maria Kolbe. And if you're interested in modern architecture, it's quite impressive. You either love it or don't, but it's impressive, if nothing else. It holds 7,000 people inside. So as a modern monument, it makes quite a statement. And I ended my trip, that's Krakow. I ended my very last night. I decided I'm going to eat in one of the touristy restaurants right in the square just because I want the view. And actually, the food was fine. I had this gigantic cocktail and another different kind of borscht. This had sour cream in it, which makes it that brilliant pink color. And of course, pierogies. And for the first time in the entire week, there was actually a little bit of weather. A storm passed through and turned the sky beautiful colors, very dramatic clouds. And then I spent the last night just kind of taking an evening stroll along the river. And wandering the picturesque streets at night before going back to my hotel and heading home. So that's the end of the program. I will stop my share and take a look at the questions. Let's see what we got. Oh, one from Shelley. Hi, Shelley. She says she went to the International Federation of Library Associations in 2017 at a conference, and Krakow was a side trip. Oh, that sounds fascinating. I'm glad you got a chance to do that. There, she talks about some of the different things that she saw on the tour, and I did not get to see an original Chopin score with annotations. That would have been amazing. Someone also is asking, does Poland only speak Polish? Well, the Poles do, of course, but as I said, I think at the beginning, if you get out into the countryside, you'll find less English. But certainly in any of the major cities in Poland, and Krakow in particular, it has so much tourism that English was not only widely spoken, it was pretty much what people started with because they assumed that you aren't going to speak Polish. And even on the few occasions when I made an attempt to say good evening or hello in Polish, they can very quickly tell you're not a native Polish speaker, so they go right into English. So don't worry about learning Polish. But my advice always is to learn a few phrases just because it's polite and a nice way to kind of break the ice with people. Do I happen to know why Krakow wasn't bombed in World War II? Part of from what I understand is a lot of it had to do with where the Nazis were actually occupying. Krakow did have Nazi occupation in the city. So they're obviously not going to they're not going to bomb places where they're going to make use of the buildings. So the outskirts of the historic city did have more significant damage, but the historic city fortunately did not. Warsaw, on the other hand, was almost 90% leveled. So most of what you see in Old Town Warsaw is reconstructed, and incredibly, it doesn't look like a reconstruction, but much of it is. Someone also asks about museum labels. Yes, I would say in most of the museums that I went to, I would say most of the labels had English. We are fortunate to have English as our native language here in the US because um, even if it's not a native language for other people, it's usually the most widely spoken second language. So if there's lots of foreign tourists, English is a good way to meet in the middle. So you will find English very widely spoken there and also written. Almost every restaurant that you go to will have both a English menu and a Polish menu. Do I take the photos? Oh, absolutely. Every photo that you see is mine. Um, um, yes, same thing. Are there other cities I've visited that have such diverse architectural buildings in the same area? This was my first trip to Poland, and it definitely whet my appetite. I want to go back. I would I would very much like to see Wrocław, Łódź is supposed to be beautiful, and also Gdansk and Warsaw. So I think hopefully in the next couple of years, I'm going to be able to go back and visit some more. Um, I was really impressed by Poland, and also the countryside of Poland is also quite beautiful. There are all kinds of small villages with unique traditions and architecture and food and so forth. So I think both the cities and the countryside in Poland are going to be places I want to go back to. And also different from Krakow, but similar in some ways. One of my favorite cities in Europe is Prague, which is another one that was fortunate enough to have mostly escaped damage during World War II, and um, it's just one of the most beautiful cities you'll ever see. Do I have a favorite architectural style? No. Because if I did, every time I saw it, I would decide, oh no, but that one's my favorite architectural style. And a nice thing about Europe, the cities are so old that you see lots of different architectural styles because this is a city that's 1,000 years old. So it has medieval buildings, it has Romanesque buildings, it has Baroque buildings, it has Renaissance, it has Gothic, it has Modern, it has Art Nouveau. So an advantage to traveling in Europe is that you get to see a variety of things like that. Are bicycles popular? Yes. Bicycles are very popular in the city and a very nice way to get around if you enjoy that. Was Krakow a center of art, both paintings and sculpture in Europe and beyond? Yes, very much so. Part of that is just because, like other royal cities, for much of the Renaissance and Gothic periods, Krakow was the royal center of Poland. So, like in Italy and France and other places, artists gravitated towards cities where they were likely to see a lot of building, a lot of churches, and potentially, if you were really lucky, royal commissions. So yes, it was very much a city like that. Did I see any evidence of the influx of Ukrainians to Poland? I didn't personally, but I have friends, actually friends here in my own town here in Wakefield, who are Polish. They've lived here for years, but they have family there from that part of Poland, and they are very active in the refugee movement because of the war. But my personal experience being there for like a week and a half was that I did not see that like on the street. I didn't see much of that. The closest I got was I ate at a really good Ukrainian restaurant. Which hotel did I stay in? I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I can find out and tell you. Robert, as you know, usually sends out probably tomorrow a follow-up email, so I can make sure that I give him that information before he sends that out to you. Yes, I would stay there again. It was a very nice hotel, and the breakfasts alone. I'm sorry, Prosecco for breakfast. I'm there. What made me visit Krakow instead of Warsaw? It tends to get more tourism and is considered a more sort of beautiful, smaller city. And I could easily have gone to both cities, but I like a lot of people go to Krakow for just a couple of days and then they go to Warsaw for a couple of days. I prefer when I travel, particularly now that I'm retired and I have time, I really want to get to know a city. And I think 2 or 3 days in Krakow, yeah, you'll see the highlights, but you won't really get a feel of everything, and you won't necessarily have time to see things in the area. So I made a commitment. I'm going to spend all my time in Krakow or nearby. And I'm going to go back and do the same thing in Warsaw. Um, what's the best time to visit? I think summer is always the worst time to go to Europe because it's very hot. Um, Poland is in the north, but it's also flat. And with climate change, Europe, you've probably seen articles about how horrible the summer has been in Europe, in parts of Europe that don't normally see temperatures that high. When I was there, I had expected actually cooler temperatures and rain, and I ended up with temperatures between 75 and 80 the whole time, and sun. So I got lucky. I would say the best times to visit are in the spring or the fall when the weather is likely to be cooler, and they're shoulder seasons, so there's a little bit of tourist activity, but it's not as busy as it is in the summer. But I was there last week of May and first beginning of June, and it was still pretty crowded. My late mother told me a group of Catholic Polish runners had I did not see that. That story sounds vaguely familiar from one of the guidebooks I read, but I don't remember seeing anything personally about it. So I would have to look into that. It sounds like a fascinating story, but I don't recall anything myself about it. How long was my trip? I think it was either 9 or 10 days total, including the travel on either end. The individually sculpted heads, on the ceiling, I forget. That's another thing I can look up and tell Robert about. I don't know the answer to which forest the Jews hid in. It's very forested in the south of Poland, so I don't know exactly. Are there mosques in Krakow? I don't believe so. I certainly didn't see anything. I don't think there are any mosques there. Do I lead tours? No. I do these presentations. I actually I don't like taking tours. I don't like to go on tours. And so no, a number of people have asked me if I would be willing to, take them on tours around the world. No. I actually prefer traveling by myself, which don't take that as an insult, but I really prefer traveling independently. I don't even always like traveling with my own friends, so I'm never going to do tours. Sorry. Was textile the most lucrative business at some time? I wouldn't doubt it, because as you remember, that main square, the cloth hall, was by far the biggest and most elaborate building in the square where all the merchants were. So I think it's quite possible. But salt, because of the salt mines, was also very important, and trade in general. Poland is flat. It had some major medieval cities that were on the road between east and west. So it was a major, there were major trade routes that crossed Poland for all different kinds of goods that were traveling from east to west and the other direction. And someone mentions that their grandson is visiting Poland as we speak. Good for them, although I bet it's hot in August. Let me check the chat. I would love to see your whole goblet. Oh, you mean what I'm drinking out of? Sorry, I have a glass of wine that's actually from South Africa. One of the advantages of doing Zoom presentations is I can drink and you can drink, unlike at the library. The name of the hotel I stayed in, I will find out and tell Robert. Perhaps because I am Jewish, I noted that everyone talked about Poles and Jews, but not Christian Poles and Jewish Poles. Yes, of course, the whole history of the Holocaust is far more complex than it often gets distilled to, particularly in a short presentation like this. I would highly recommend, if you travel there or have an interest or have family connections in your family history, it's difficult history to read about and learn about, but it's way more complicated than I talked about here. As I mentioned, we all know that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, but there was so much more going on in different parts, with Russian soldiers, with gay and lesbian people, with people like Seventh-day Adventists, and it's so important that we learn about this history, because as we know from things that are going on in different parts of the world today, we don't seem to have learned much. And the more we learn, the more we have a chance of maybe preventing things from the future. Lots of nice compliments, but I don't see any specific questions. Oh, someone else likes Georgian food. As I mentioned, Georgia, the country, is very high on my list. I'm a big fan of Georgian food. I even have a Georgian cookbook that I use a lot here because Georgian food is delicious, as is Georgian wine. If you are able to get it, it's not imported here very, very well, but if you're lucky to find any Georgian wines, give it a try. Yes, Chopin was born in Warsaw and is very connected to Poland, but he spent much of his later life in France, of course, and in Majorca also. But a lot of his music recalls the traditional music of Poland, and he made it his own. Someone wants to know if they can contact me because they have questions. Absolutely, I will. Robert, I think, always includes my email, and I may not know the answer to every question, but I'm always happy to take people's emails, either comments or questions about this presentation or travel questions in general. I'm not an expert, but I can tell you what I know. And as a librarian, if we don't know the answer, we can find it. So I'll do my best, and I'll make sure that Robert includes that. What's the name of the cookbook? Oh, you mean the Georgian cookbook? Can you see it? Wait a minute. Let me look at I hope you can see it. It's called Supra. So if you like Georgian food, borrow it from the library or buy it and try some of the recipes. They're delicious. And I can't wait to go to Georgia and do a presentation on it. So I think I got all the questions, but if I missed any, I'll try to answer them through Robert when he sends out his email.
So folks, let's give Jeff a big virtual round of applause for a great presentation. I will be sending out, let's say tomorrow morning, I'll be sending out an email with a link to this recording and information about some other upcoming virtual programs that might be of interest. I'll also include Jeff's email address, his Instagram link, and any answers, additional supplemental information and answers he wants me to provide to all of you. Just a note, Jeff will be back in 5 weeks on Tuesday, September 23rd at 2 o'clock. And that presentation is going to be a little different. It's basically going to be how to learn a language before you travel. Those are my words, not yours, Jeff, but that's how I'm going to go with marketing it. And also next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, Joy Marzoff will be joining us for Armchair Travel to New Zealand. So lots of great stuff coming up. Jeff, any last words for the audience?
Nope. Thank you very much. I hope I'll see you next time. As Robert said, that'll be a slightly different one because it's not photography, and it'll probably be a little bit shorter, but I hope more interactive because the reason I'm doing it is I've had a lot of questions from people about language when I travel. Is it necessary to know the language? Do they speak English? And I have my own personal experiences with learning foreign languages for various reasons. And I thought, as a librarian, I always got questions about what's the best way to do it. And the answer is there's no best way, but there's a lot of ways that you can do it. And I'm going to try to share a lot of those with you and what I've done to give you some ideas of, depending on what your motivation is, what ways that you might think about trying to do it for yourself. So that'll be a little bit different, and I'm kind of looking forward to it because it won't be the typical presentation that I normally do, and I hope you'll participate with lots of questions.
Sure. Great. So we will see Jeff next month, and look for that follow-up email for me tomorrow, and please take the feedback survey when you exit the Zoom. So thank you all so much, and I hope
Thanks for
everyone
having me, and I'll
enjoys the
see you
rest
next
of their
time.
day. Great job, Jeff, as always.
Take
We'll see
care,
you soon.
everyone.